Great. Thank you very much, Suzanne, for organizing this. Rachel, Lauren, everybody else who showed up today. This is a very exciting moment in our state. So what I want to do today is make an argument for why you should refuse the tests, why you should get your kids to refuse the tests, why you should do everything you can to help bring down this testing regime that we're in. My argument has 5 points. First is what we're fighting for. Children deserve a well-rounded education. Right? That's what I want. Second point is that Common Core narrows the curriculum. So it defeats the purpose of a well-rounded education that we want for our children. The third point is that the testing is what's used to force people to do the Common Core. And then there are 2 reasons to refuse the tests. The first is just render the data useless. If not enough people take the test, the data becomes useless, the whole machine wobbles. And then the final point is we want to send a message that we want better for our kids. So when I was asked to speak as a parent to 2 parents. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm a professor at Fordham University, and I've just become interested in this issue because I care about my kids, and the fact that you all showed up tonight signals that you care about kids. So let me go through the argument. So first point, I won't take too long on it, it's that children deserve a well-rounded education. So they deserve things like math, English, science, history, music, physical education, theater, field trips. So this is just a part of the curriculum that covers a wide range of topics, that it concerns more sort of reading in books, but also doing things with your hands, actually moving with your feet, going to see different people who have different bodies of knowledge. It requires teachers to have a little bit of freedom to do a good job. I mean, I think that there's the reformers are focusing on math because that seems to be the one that is most amenable to standardization. I'm not sure about that, but I know it doesn't apply when you're doing things like theater. I mean, I was in a school play in 4th grade. It just changed my life. And here's a picture of Woodland Hills, Montessori. It's by Albany. It's where former Education Commissioner John King sends his kids. Diane Ravitch, the scholar, I'm sure many of you know who she is. One of the points she makes is that there's actually not much of a debate about what makes a good education for kids through K through 12. Right? There really isn't much of a debate. If you ask parents, you say, do you want kids to be in a small class size or a big class size? Everyone's going to say small class size, right? Do you want your teachers to be well-trained and have a little bit of freedom to be professionals? Of course. Right? Just go to various private schools, and there's going to be a certain consistency about what makes a good education. Common Core narrows the curriculum to math and English. And here's a title of an article in the New York Times. With Common Core, fewer topics but covered more rigorously. I think that's right. Right? It's 2 topics. And it's covered more rigorously. Right? What does rigorously mean? Rigorously, if you just look at etymology, it means inflexible. So it is one size fits all in 2 subjects. Now, here's my take on what's happening here. And my friend Katie, she lent me a book talking about the history of the standardization movement. And here's my working hypothesis. At the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, rich people wanted poor kids to study reading, writing, and arithmetic, and nothing else. Right? Why are you going to pay for poor kids to study science and history and field trips and small class sizes? Right? Why are rich people going to pay for that for poor kids? Then you had John Dewey, pretty heroic philosopher of progressive education and progressive education movement. They fought back, and they didn't win, but they pushed back, and they said most kids deserve lots of things that rich kids get. And I'm just very thankful that I was educated when I was educated. I mean, my high school education stopped right before the real standardization movement took off. So I consider myself very fortunate that I got a kind of progressive education in a public school. But that's not what we have right now. And what you basically have are the new oligarchs pushing the new version of reading, writing, and arithmetic. And they're using unbelievably pretentious jargon. They're hiring PR crews around the clock. I mean, a lot of us here are tweeting and Facebook and public relations battles, fighting these people who are paid by oligarchs to promote the Common Core. And all these things are getting pushed out, right? I could spend the whole time talking about my kid's education. My oldest son's in 3rd grade. He hasn't done a science experiment in school yet. Right? We live not far from John Jay's house, one of the Federalist authors of the Federalist Papers. My son hasn't any history yet. Right? And sometimes Common Core defenders will say, well, those topics are covered by ELA, English Language Arts, that you read an informational text about the topic under consideration. That's not science. Right? At Woodland Hills, they have labs. They're doing experiments. They have gardens. Reading informational text and answering questions using words from the text, that's not what I want for my kids. Right? And then just things like theater and field trips. And our school district is fighting so valiantly to retain some kind of well-rounded education for their kids. And sometimes I have parents saying, Nick, that's not happening here. It's not here. It's not so bad. And I say, just look on the horizon what the plans are, because the vice is tightening, where it's two topics taught in such a way that you're preparing for standardized tests. So just to review, I'm here, I came across the Tappan Zee Bridge, I'm not getting paid, I'm just doing this because I love my kids. And I want a better education for them. And I think you deserve better education for your kids than a lot of that we're being sold. Okay, let's talk about these tests a little bit now. What's the role in these tests? I've been reading about the standards testing and accountability movement. It's that book she provided, The Allure of Order, is just great at talking about the history of it. I thought it went back to maybe 1990, but actually there's reform movements going back to the beginning of the 20th century, the mid-20th century. But let me start with a more recent version of the thesis, and this is a guy named Eric Hanishek. And Eric Hanishek, doesn't teach. He's at the Hoover Institute at Stanford. And he's an economist that a lot of education reformers like. And here's a quote from an essay he wrote a couple years ago. The future of our schools depends heavily on dealing with the small number of teachers who simply should not be in the classroom. Specifically by replacing the bottom 5 to 10% of teachers with the average teacher found in today's classrooms, research indicates that the achievement of U.S. students would rise. So here's the part that's a little bit plausible. We all know that there are stronger teachers and weaker teachers, right? But the only way that he's saying that we should measure teachers, in Cuomo and Merrill Tisch and other education reformers buy this part entirely. The only way you can determine whether a teacher is effective or not effective is their students' test scores. So let's try to think through the logic here. What these people, education reformers following Hanishek, are trying to do is fire 5 to 10% of the teachers a year. Right? When you listen to Cuomo when he says, we're not, how is it that only 1% of the teachers, or not even 1% of the teachers got fired when so many kids are failing the test? There's something the matter here. Part of the thinking is this Eric Hanishek model where you fire 5 to 10% a year. And now you're thinking, well, wait a minute. You just said that Common Core is math and English. So what are they doing for the other subjects? So I feel almost a little ashamed for just explaining such a stupid idea, but here we go. People in other subjects are responsible for the ELA and math tests. Right, so I have a friend who teaches pottery upstate. And her APPR now is going to be 50% of the test scores of the other kids in the school. How does that make sense? That doesn't make sense, right? It's just a madness. I feel like so many of the parents here have to come together to just stop such a bad hypothesis from getting traction. And just think about what's going to happen as a result, right? Now that all of a sudden you're going to have teachers just teaching to the test because they got to pay their mortgage and their kids got to eat and their kids got to go to school, right? So there's this frantic race to teach 2 topics. For today's talk, I'm not even going to talk about the bizarre way of studying those two topics. Right? I'm going to put that to the side. The first draft I talk about metacognition and math and close reading in English, but for today let's just say two topics. So you've got everybody in the school teaching these two topics. And now you've got 5 to 10% of people who are going to be fired. So is there going to be a spirit of cooperation in the school? Right? Or is it going to be like the Hunger Games? I guess I'm over that should Let me just say something too. Do you think that they're doing this plan at Woodland Hills where John Keaton sends his own kids? No way. No way are they doing this, right? This is an experiment with a really bad hypothesis that I don't know what ed reformers are doing. Maybe they're trying to see how much of the democratic spirit is still alive in this country, to see how much we can push back about really bad ideas. So anyhow, we're here, you're here, thank you. Let's go to the next point here. What should we do with this situation? Well, you play the cards that you're dealt. And one of the things we can do is refuse the tests. And here's an article that just came out this past week with Chalkbeat in New York City. And the quote is from Meryl Tisch. She's the chancellor. She's the head of the Board of Regents. She sets education policy in this country. And she says that opting out of the state exams is a terrible mistake. And read the article if you like. One of the points she says is, the state spent, this is a multi-billion-dollar investment. Is that a good argument? It's not a good, that's just simply not a good argument. And the fact is that we were never asked for this plan. I mean, in 2009, I was subscribing to the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Financial Times. I had no idea about Race to the Top in 2009, right? It was just snuck in. And the fact is that there were factions within states that wanted those reforms, right? So it's not just purely a state, federal government imposition. There were locals who wanted it, but it was largely facilitated by this federal competition for grants. And the Regents reform agenda that aligned with the Race to the Top, there was never a public debate. So effectively what happened is parents were doing other things, right? We're busy. And then all of a sudden we've discovered that these people have come up with, Meryl Tisch and others have come up with this bad idea for education, right? So the fact is that for them to fire teachers, for them to take over schools and turn them into charter schools, for them not to be able to not promote kids, is they need that data. So the first reason to refuse the test is you don't want to give them the data. And then the final point that I'll make today is that refusing signals that we want better for our kids. Right? That today is just, this is just the fight of the moment, this is the battle, the war's going to keep going. And here's a quote from Secretary of Education Arne Duncan. Once again, I feel bad for saying that. If I was in a classroom, I'd ask somebody else to read it. Common core opposition comes from white suburban moms who, all of a sudden, their child isn't as brilliant as they thought they were. So I'd love to pass the microphone and get your response. There's just a 2-word response from that on the data. So first off is that's just incredibly offensive, right? I mean, Sarah Blaine, who's this New Jersey parent who's come on the scene like a hurricane, somebody once called me hysterical. And actually, Sarah Blaine pointed out that hysterical comes from the word uterus. And so that there's this weird gender dynamic going on, where this 6'5" basketball player is like calling out moms. Right? So it's just, one, it's offensive. 2, it's just not accurate. Right? Look at this group. Like, it's a very diverse group. And white suburban moms are citizens too. Right? if there are white suburban moms in this audience, you're allowed to participate in the democratic process. If you see your kids getting hurt, you're allowed to mobilize to fight back. But just as a matter of fact, it's a very diverse movement. And my hunch is it's only going to get more diverse as more and more people piece together what's actually happening to their kids. And here's just my final point here, is that Arnie Duncan and others, they're making it sound like we don't want to be told that our kids aren't brilliant, that we don't want to hurt their feelings, that we don't want school to be hard for them. And my 9-year-old, he's in 3rd grade, and the thing I tell him is, we're not refusing because we want school to be easy for you. We're refusing because we want school to be better for you. And that's what I hope I've conveyed to you today. Thank you very much.